Hi, everybody. My name is Conrad Agramont, the CEO here at Agile IT. Thanks for taking the time to join us and talk a little bit about zero trust security. During this session today, we have quite a few topics that we're going to cover. We don't want to really race through this, but there's really a lot of stuff that's in here. I try to hit on the kind of important conceptual things that I really think everybody needs to walk away from it. So if you decided you needed to bail at some other time, that's fine, but really make sure that you stay on at least for 10-15 minutes because these are the things that conceptually you really kind of have to have in your brain to kind of go through it. What we really want to do by the end of this session is you should know a little bit more about what the kind of pattern or practice zero trust security, what does that mean? What are some kind of key components that that you should take into consideration? For this session, I'm gonna focus a little bit more as if you're mainly kind of a Microsoft shop, if you will, or if you got a lot of Microsoft stuff, because most of it's desktops and servers. But it's not just there; it's all the other kind of key components that are part of it. I'll talk a bit about some of the other kind of security services that are out there today that help with this. Fulfill the promise of what this architecture is meant to be, and then I'll wrap up with what is Agile IT doing about it, and what are some key steps for success? How do you get started? What do you do next? So that's what we'll get done today. Again, lots of things that we'd want to follow up afterwards. So taking a step back, who are we? So Agile IT is a company that was founded on doing things into the cloud, and this really is our vision. And as the CEO for this business, this is something that I drive every day for our employees, partners that we work with, and absolutely with our customers. The three key parts in the bottom are really important. That's what actually leads to a lot of this, which is we want to build a community of managed service customers so they can share ideas and kind of learn from one another. Security is a core component of what we do. This is a really driving force of what we're doing here as a message of this pattern around zero trust security, and it's something that we drive all the time. And then digital transformation, really kind of digitizing, if you will, what we do as a business and what our customers are doing with their business. Everybody's doing it. Sometimes you don't even realize you are, but you are. But those are other topics. But we're really going to focus on the security part today. So why zero trust security? So I don't believe in doing anything unless there's a real problem. I love technology. I grew up in the technology world as an engineer and then software development, building products at Microsoft for a number of years. But if you don't start off with a problem, it's just a lot of stuff, right? So, if we look at what the problem is today, and some of these are just problems just where the market is. The first is we look at what most infrastructure looks like. You have this on-prem environment, you have a firewall. Normally when everybody talks about, hey, what's your security environment? First thing that people like to talk about is their firewall. Oh, I have this device and I block these ports, and then it was, I put these scanners in front of it so it can detect these items. And the whole purpose was I need to protect my people, my content. When you're an IT department, that's your view, right? You're protecting all these assets. People work for us. We have content in their devices, and I need to protect it. So firewall, really that's where the perimeter is. Everything inside of there, because I can't control things that leave my perimeter, but I can control this. And that was the traditional view. Now, what grew over time, the reason why shadow IT is very, kind of a key topic. We did something like that on our tech talks not too long ago, and so that's available on the web, so you can go look at one of the tech talks on shadow IT. But different IT departments started, or different departments started doing their own kind of IT-ish thing. Oh, we need Salesforce, right? The classic example. So salespeople went on and got it because it fixed our problems, because it was too hard to do things in IT or get a deployment. So they just whipped out their credit card and started buying it. But now it's pervasive. It's all kinds of things all over the place. But now that gets exacerbated by different people have different devices. They do have their workstations. They do have those, but they also have other devices that they access corporate information with. So we want to block those down. And normally it means, I being the IT department have to own that. Again, this is just kind of setting the stage of where zero trust really relies as a principle. So same person might have different identities. They have an Active Directory account. They might even be an Office 365. They have an Office 365, which essentially uses Azure Active Directory behind the scenes, Hopefully you're synced. If you're one of our customers, high likelihood that you are. But sometimes they're accessing other sources, either themselves, right? Facebook, personalized accounts. Why should I care about Facebook? Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Some are provided through the business. You've bought another SaaS application, whether it was Shadow IT or the IT department. So now, as you start to look at what your existing landscape is in your mind as you draw it out on the whiteboard, it absolutely looks like this. This is you today. Somebody says on this call that they're not you today, most likely I probably know who you are, and we've talked quite a bit about this. But just about everybody else is exactly like this, whether you realize it or not. One of the reasons why, if you're attending this webinar, you're looking at this and saying, yes, absolutely, this is, my particular problem or something I worry about today, or I didn't know what zero trust security was, and I'm watching the webinar for the first time, and I guess I do have a problem. So, that's why this is the reason why, we have to move on to something, very different. So these really are, our view of what it is. If you find out in the marketplace, so the one thing to know about zero trust security is that it's not just one thing that you go by. I would like some zero trust security, please, and I will pay whatever amount that that it costs, because it's not just one thing. It's a series of things. And if you look at security as a whole, the one thing that you'll probably hear throughout the industry is that security is a lifestyle, it's a practice, because it's ever evolving. And sometimes it's because of really bad actors, which is why most people think, well, I'm so small, nobody's trying to hack me. Incorrect. The things I have aren't nearly that important. Also incorrect. Those are myths that make you feel good. Problem is that you're right, nobody's trying to attack you, but you are an endpoint that somehow those bad things land and they just run, because automated Trojan horses, attacks, phishing attacks, don't typically, unless you're a big company, they don't typically target you. You are no longer important. It's the endpoint of what you or it is, and whatever it's information that or whatever hack that is, it just enjoys being in your environment. It enjoys to find as much as it can and send it back to somebody else, lose it, all kinds of stuff. So I'll talk about that in a bit. So but you really have to follow this practice. So the first part is putting people at the center. Now, I know when we say this, it feels like a very kind of HR wonderful thing. People are at the center of our business. It's true. However, from an IT department, normally we don't look at the person as the center. That's why we call them an end user, or somewhere at the end, right? Think about the word, right? They're an end user. They're at the end of it, but they're really at the center, right? Because they are the ones that perform actions. They are the ones that move around places. They are the ones that either do some work or analyze work. They are the ones that have permissions. So putting them at the center of what you need to work on allows you to start thinking, how do I protect, or how do I manage things that they can or cannot do wherever. So putting them at the center is a very important mindset. So again, this all goes to the pattern of zero trust security, and then we'll see how all this rolls together. The other one is having a central source for identity management. People used to say, well, I want a single username and password. And that's true. That's nice. But well, no, I don't want them to have passwords, and I want them to do multi-factors as an example. I want them to have devices as part of the multi-factor. I want their multi-factor to be a text message. I want it to be an app. Whatever that might be, those are just other controls, but you also want to have that available everywhere. Okay, you want a standard way of managing those policies everywhere. The other is the scope of protection and policies. In the past, it was, I'm going to define a policy for a firewall. I'm going to define a policy for a workstation. I'm going to define a policy for a device. I'm going to define a policy for who should access, how people should access certain security services. I'm going to define policies, right? Sometimes those policies don't even know of one another. Sometimes, a lot of times, people will create these policies as a written document. No enforcement. I don't even know if people are doing it or not, but it sounds good because there's a standard that says I should write it down, and you should write it down. But what you really should do is make sure that somehow you're validating that those policies are being met, or enforcing that those policies are being met. The only way you can do that is when you start to say, hey, I need these policies to be effective everywhere. And they're going to be attached to a user, right? So I have a user, I have attachments to these policies. So, and when I think about that, it means every single point where people enter in, at the very least, that some policy enforcement needs to be validated, right? So, these again, the kind of the pattern, if you will, for zero trust. The second and last bullet here really is, if you're going to have a good security posture. So what is my posture today? And your posture can change at any given point. You want your policies and you want your infrastructure to both work really well together. Hopefully they're integrated and they can work well with one another. So alerts and patching services and intrusion detection and threat analysis all can integrate their data and integrate their services to make it easier to troubleshoot and run through. At the same time, you also don't want them to work great independently. If one service isn't there, something else is happening that's not there. So, it's an idea, but so this is an idea for you. Not to say that you should design that you should implement it this way, but if you were to, if let's say for example, you took your firewall out of your corporate network, all right, just let internet traffic come through, open up all the ports, all right. How nervous would you feel? Super nervous, right? I mean, who wouldn't? Why do you not feel that nervous when you're out in Starbucks? Why don't you feel that nervous when you're on your device at the soccer or baseball field? Right? So if you design it in that way, you start to think about all the other things you need to do. Now, don't take it away your firewall. Again, it's multiple layers of security are important, but think of it that way. If I don't have it, what happens? Because you do live this way. And then last but not least really is around your deployments. So very, very often, and we've done this too in many places, but we've been making lots of changes at Agile IT and even more stuff to announce here shortly. Everything that you do, one, should be automated, including building just one little box. It should be automated. It should be well managed. So what that means is if you automate it because you use an automation tool or that did the deployment for you, or use something like like Azure DevOps, or use something like Chef or Puppet, desired state configuration, whatever it is that you're using to push these things out, you want to both have that so you can keep track and make it repeatable. But the other thing is, whatever you're using to automate, which normally comes down to some level of scripting or templates, you want to version control those scripts and templates. All this is really challenging, things that we try to really help our, both ourselves and our customers, but there's no way else that you can go back and know exactly what you did, how it was done, so that if there is an issue, you can work through it. Okay, I've talked a lot about this side. So, but anyway, those are, let me go back. These are kind of the core principles. So if you printed this out, put it someplace and thought every time you design something, am I meeting these goals? If you're not, that's okay, but are you making strides too? That's what's really key and important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the first thing. Any project that I do anywhere, if you've done work with me, you've heard me say this, bazillion times, and I'll say it more. First thing you can ever do is take inventory. What do I have today? Right? We all want to talk about the future, but the question of getting to zero trust, you really have to know what you have. And if you don't have clear documentation on what you have in terms of identity access, how are your roles and people assigned, and it is so hard to get to zero trust, because once you turn everything off, people still need to access it. So if you don't take good inventory of that and then use that as a guide to say, okay, as we start to transition to this, some things may change for our people. Certain things absolutely going to change in how they access it. But I need to turn it on in a way, and I'll talk about this towards the end of our session. I need to turn it on in a way that makes sense to them, so we can continuously make improvements on our security, but make sure we have it. So, some of the things you really need to take a look at is what is in your infrastructure. Your Wi-Fi devices, your workstation, where do they go? Who has them? What information do they access? It's probably one of the hardest problems to go do, because it requires things outside of the IT department. But I always think that's a really good thing. The more things you know about the other departments, how they use it, what they need, just the more effective we can be as an IT staff to give them the best services in a secure, productive way that we can. But you really have to have these things, because as we go here in a little bit and start to find what we need to go do, the way we roll it out, the way we enable it, directly impacts these people. And we're going to ask questions about this. So you absolutely have to know it. So let's talk about, if I'm a Microsoft shop, and let's say I have Active Directory already there, and I use group policies, and I have these different devices. So what do I really need in order to get closer to a zero trust security environment? There is no one check off. We are working on something that has kind of like a nice framework that allows you to kind of see based off what you have, where you fall alignment in terms of getting to a, kind of a meter in terms of good. Like, hey, I'm essentially good at a zero trust security environment versus those that are, I wouldn't say bad, but early in their stages. Let's just say bad. It's bad. Yeah. If I put my username and password on a post-it note and put on my monitor, you are bad. So, how do we get away from those sorts of things? Anyway, here are kind of the core things to think about of what you need to do. Now, I'm not going to talk about the implementation of all these. Probably something we'll do in a collection of tech talks that we do on a weekly basis. Those are available to our MSP and CSP customers. If you did a project with us and did CSP, it's something you have access to. If you're not in it, make sure to send us and make sure we get involved. We're going to talk about the pieces of this. Because we have customers that, we still do a lot of great things with, but they have their own IT staff and we have a lot of little questions. But it's the collection of this. Like, this is why I can't just sell, one solution, $5,000 to go do this, because you might have some devices that don't support it. You're going to need some, switch, Wi-Fi devices that do allow for radio, radius authentication through, through that device for Wi-Fi. So that way, when one of your users, people, try to get on the Wi-Fi, there's a secure method that says, oh, both I trust that particular device and I trust that particular user in order to access my network. Most times, the IT department will just push out a group policy SID, and that trusts the device, but it doesn't say anything about the user. All right. The other thing is, I may as they're accessing these services, I may want to put other types of policies. Maybe my employees should get access, but not those employees, right? Because sometimes they shouldn't get access to certain networks for whatever it might be. Maybe they're temporary contractors or whatever that might be. But I could define those policies of how and when they get access to it. So again, all these things kind of come together. So if you think about, well, what are the key components that I need to have for zero trust security, kind of this Microsoft shop dish, this is a good list to start with. Every deployment's a little bit differently. I need a little of this and I need a little of that. Those are things that you can please get in contact with us and we'll talk about. But there's a place to kind of get you started. So when we look at, the first thing that was on there was the Microsoft 365. The reason, I like to start there is, unlike, all the other pieces where you may have to buy new hardware, you may need to buy new equipment and, new servers, service deployments for, NPS for Radius and Wi-Fi. It's those are things you can get there. But most of the customers that we work with, remember our vision and who we are, as a cloud company. If you're on Office 365, there's a lot of it you can do without Office 365, but most customers make that leap right afterwards with EMS. So if you're on Office 365, add on the security piece, which you can just do with EMS. But if you get the whole picture, the whole vision of what it is, where it's Windows 10 and EMS, so you control your security and information protection as well as your identity, that's what Microsoft 365 is, along with Office 365, all in one umbrella to pull it all together. So I'm not going to talk about all these. I'm going to talk about, a few of them. The one thing I'll tell you is that there's a lot, and it is always changing. So when we give out kind of recommendations of, hey, if you're going to have a security professional that's working for you, if you're at a company that's over 200 people, you're going to need a half-time or full-time person that just focuses on this. And it's not because you're deploying servers, it's not server deployments anymore, is you need somebody that keeps track of the alerts, follows up on activities, stays up to date with other security information that's being available, that's out there, be your incident response policy. So, that's why we provide services to help our customers with it, to either help with that half-time person, sometimes with that full-time person, or where that full-time person as a whole. Anyway, so these are really kind of the key areas or key things that you need from a Microsoft 365 perspective. So when you really think about the old way, and when I say old way, it's today, because many people do this, right? Username and passwords, the reuse their password all over again. Most people, I bet you, that log into their into your corporate environment, they're using a password that they also use for Snapchat, that they also use for Facebook. The password that they use, but you changed them. Oh, that's right, they changed it. That's cool. Now they use the password they use for Target. Remember the big thing they had at Target? Oh, No problem. I made them change it again. Oh, well, that's all right. I have another password that I use all the time. This one I use on Google. So the passwords that most people use often are the same ones that they're using in their corporate environment, which means when they get hacked on their consumer account and you're like, oh, big deal, that's not us. Guess what? Now they have a password that probably works in your environment. That's where we go to MFA. If they do have a username and password, it's just one part of the challenge. The next part is that you may want to hit them with a text message or use what Microsoft has, an authenticator app. There's other ways to go do it. That happens. There's other policies you have that make it better. But this is the whole reason why we're saying you need to go to a new way. I'll tell you what used to happen years ago was to do MFA, because MFA is really not a new technology. RSA has been doing it for years, but it's so expensive. Not just the devices, but the infrastructure you had to run. You had to get people trained on it to understand how to deploy and configure it. Now, you heard me say, well, you have to get people to configure. Yeah, because they got to do a lot of things, but they don't have to deploy servers anymore. They don't have to update those servers anymore. They don't have to spend all night configuring Radius with Exchange and SharePoint and your line of business applications. You don't do those things anymore. Now it's just done at the identity level in Azure Active Directory. So it makes things much, much simpler, which means more people can have access to do these things, but you have to kind of take that leap. But it's just one of them. So really, when you think again of all these different, services and servers that you have, having a central view of all that's important. So a lot of times when you see MFA on applications, it's because they want to do their MFA. You're doing their multi-factor authentication logon when you log on with user password onto their environment. Really moving a single sign-on into a centralized environment says that I can turn on MFA in my one place, and every time they access an application that uses that username or that authentication through our service, I can now control that whole experience, because it's not that they're logging on that place, they're always logging on with me, quote unquote me, right? So having it one place allows me to have that strong place. This is where we talk a lot about Azure Active Directory's key area, which is called conditional access, because some of the things I can do is every time people access things, the system itself, these are the policies that the sign gets to ask questions, right? Now I define my policy that really creates the rule, but sometimes if they're accessing, accessing a service when they're inside of my network, I feel like I can kind of trust them, because one, they normally have to get into my environment. So maybe I don't want to hit them with an MFA when they're inside the corporate environment. I could say I want that to happen every time if you're a global admin. I may want to happen every time you're this type of user, but everybody else is okay. So I get to create these kind of rules and assessments. So really, this gives me that kind of control of defining what my policy is and what the expected behavior is. And again, in the past, it used to be, oh, if I turn MFA, I turn it on for everybody all the time, right? Now you have much, much granular control, and there's more coming out all the time with Azure Active Directory. So it's really phenomenal what they've been doing there from that standpoint. So the single sign-on just doesn't have to be, for things that are in cloud. Azure Active Directory is really cool because it has SAML integrated through it. So any other service that's SAML based, and I believe it also does OAuth, and there's some, I think maybe OpenID, it gives you a lot of controlled access to those other applications. And many of them are inside of what's called the Azure Active Directory Marketplace. So which means that vendor and Microsoft have already worked together to say, yep, we know how to quickly publish. So still requires testing, getting the right setup and the certs, document the process is what we want to do. Anybody can just go do it and turn on for 15 minutes, but then it really just doesn't align to the right groups, doesn't have the right communication to users. So there's more work than just hitting a couple checkboxes that need to go on. All right, device management and health. So this is one that I think is always overlooked. Always overlooked until there's a problem, as most things go. So really when we're looking at protecting from cyber attacks, it happens in different areas. I'm not going to cover all these. I'm just going to cover, I think, one or two scenarios. So, but you really have to think again of, I need to protect these kind of 4 key buckets all the time: identity, apps and data, devices, and infrastructure. Each one of them has a different pattern of usage. Each one of them is used in different ways. And each one of them needs to be protected. But however, I do want to kind of pull all that together, because doing all these things separately is normally kind of a big pain. So one of the things that you want to do, if you haven't seen this already, is phishing attacks. So, you do want to be able to protect against phishing attacks, other kind of cyber attacks, if you have links. So with Office 365, advanced threat protection used to be a paid service. Now I believe it's included with a number of other licenses, excuse me, or you can buy a one-off, or it's just a part of the EMS and Microsoft 365 suite. And you kind of want to prevent these problems before it happens, right? So you can protect it at the email link. So when somebody clicks on the link, Microsoft's already checked it and said, hey, this is a bad thing. What if somebody just put that link in the document? Send the document. I want that scanned too. What if just somebody sent it to me in IM and I click on the link? Wouldn't you want the Windows client itself to go, you know what, that's bad? You'd want that level of protection in multiple places, because you don't get everything through email. All right. So this is the other important part, is I hear all the time, well, we have a filter for that in email. Well, what if it comes through a document? What if you downloaded it from a trusted source? That doesn't go through your email filtering. What happens then? Again, multiple layers of security, and you have to think threats come from all of them. The nice thing is, if you can define the policy in Microsoft 365, which you can ensure that it's enforced in all of those different areas. You still have to go through some configuration, make it happen, but then you're protected with the same level of engines and policies and services, whether they got it through a mobile phone, on the desktop, so on and so forth. So again, this is where you want to have that, as well as kind of protecting your devices. So you want to look for things like abnormal usage. So somebody's using a well-defined enterprise app, and let's say you were using the HubSpot for CRM, and you do single sign-on through Active Directory, and it's something that you're protecting. It can start to see that there's a bit of a pattern of misuse, as well as for like Office 365 applications and files. So this is just kind of a view of cloud app security that can give you some of that assessment. So you want to get that not just from, again, the email service itself, but everything else, all in kind of one unified view. And that's a lot of what you're seeing coming out of Microsoft 365 as kind of a package. So one is defining those policies, rolling it out. You have this person or ourselves who looks at this report often to see, hey, we see a trend that's happening. Sometimes those are good things. Hey, we had a bunch of people that went over to Europe doing a conference and conventions the first time. Cool, notified and made it accepted. Or no, that's bad, and I want to put rules and policies that prevent that. That's not what's happening. So you want to be able to see what the recommendations, some remediation, and go do it. I'll tell you that many people set this up, but don't check it nearly as often. When they do check it, they see there were all these alerts, and man, that's just not a good statement to go back to the CEO or CFO and say, hey, yeah, we've seen this been happening for a while. We did nothing. Well, we were busy. So this is why it's important to put on the top of the heap. Okay, so one of the things that is also key is a file. So one of my little favorite things around security is about a file. If you think about files are just a perfect example of something in that file is extremely valuable, but we don't typically treat it as a valuable item. The reason I say we don't treat it as a valuable item is, say, well, we put it in a SharePoint site and I secured it. Good. Access to that is secure, but once I get access to it, it's not so much secure anymore, right? Because I can take it, put it on a thumb drive, forget it in the hotel, somebody else picks it up. Or I get the device, I email it to somebody, they inadvertently emailed it to something else, nobody's protecting the file anymore. So really you want to be able to provide some security around that file. And in the past, it was great because you could, or not, but you would say, oh, but I did put information protection on it. That's great. That step is huge, awesome first step to go do. The challenge is that some people don't classify it as a valuable item. So in the past, you had to explicitly say, oh, this is a valuable item that I want to protect. So even if you did have something in SharePoint and you did put information protection, that's great. But what if that information that you put in the document, that you put in SharePoint, actually was exports from, let's say, an SAP system? I export it out, I put a document and put it there. Follow that process, it's always great. But if I access the SAP area, copy the same things, put on a file, put on my desktop, and then email it out, well, nothing prevents that. So, what you really want is you want the system, by the system, I mean your email services, your desktop services, your mobile services. This is where all these things come together. be able to recognize a pattern and classify that, hey, that information looks like something we want to protect. I'm going to throw some protection on it. Automatically, user doesn't get to decide. Now, if something's not working, you can change the policy and change the behavior, but you probably want to go a little extra controlly on these things and then refine as you go, because this is what you really want, right? Check the data so it gets detected, classified, put protection policies on it, and now no matter where it goes, you send it to somebody else who's supposed to have access, put it on a Dropbox, they log on with their active, Azure Active Directory account, even though it went through Dropbox, they use it, no problem, they send it within the organization, no problem. Somebody hacked into Dropbox, happens, and got access to that file, no problem, it's been protected. So when they get the file, they try and open it up, it's encrypted. When they try, it'll say, hey, I need to authenticate, and it tries to go to AD. They do have somebody's username and password that they found, but they don't have their cell phone, so they don't get MFA. I've protected it, and I, as an IT department, had to do really nothing, as a part of that whole scheme. So understanding that whole life cycle, the main thing is defining a policy and the steps to do it. Again, zero trust. I don't trust anybody that accesses these concepts. People have to prove it. So the authentication proves it, the information protection policies enforces it. So it's following, essentially following the lifestyle that we've defined. So remember the thing we said in zero trust, in terms of pattern and practice, we won't define rules and policies that we put out there. People can still, reclassify or classify things that we want, but this allows me to have the control that I really want in that. And again, because that policy, that security has been defined and then gets, inserted or injected into the document itself, those policies go wherever it goes. Yes, you can declassify it or update it afterwards if you want. So you can update it even when it's out in the wild, because maybe they do need access to it. So you have still that control, but you normally want to protect more things, because you want to have a general rule and manage exceptions as they need to. So again, just another example, as you're working on something because it has, some credit card information that's in the file, you want it to say, oh, I'm auto classifying you. And again, you have a policy that person doesn't have the right to make those changes. I'm supposed to have this credit card information. I wouldn't suggest you do this, but let's say you did. You had it in a spreadsheet, you put it in there, have a business, and this is a key thing we need to go do, or maybe it's accidental. But the system actually controlled the policy for you. In the past, it was, man, we are in a lot of trouble. So this is something you want. Again, now the other thing is, as you're protecting that information, you want these policies to also flow through to your mobile devices. So if they're accessing that information through a mobile device, whether, because that spreadsheet could have been saved on a OneDrive or SharePoint, or going through Teams into SharePoint, and I access it from my mobile phone, you want the same policies to be affected, and you still want to be able to read it through that mobile device. So you can absolutely update your security to have that. What I didn't talk so much was on the multi-factor authentication part of it, around the having these devices and access to it, and being able to protect, again, through a fob, through authentication, whatnot. Because again, you kind of have to prove who you are and what you're doing. Now, once you define all of these policies, it's really easy to get enamored with everything that's out there. How do you digest it all? How do you define what you need to go do? So really having one way to monitor and customize your policies is really important. So that's the nice thing that you get in Microsoft 365. Remember what I said, it's great when you can look at the whole scope and then have them kind of roll up to one another. But when they're disconnected, like my phone is on a plane or something like that, the services continue to function great. So they work great with disconnected, but they're meant to work well even together. The other thing is, you want to define those policies again that can really apply across your different devices, that can really apply to everything. So what sometimes people think is, well, hey, if I just do this with Azure Active Directory, and you could use another service. I'm just using this as one example to make it kind of clean. But if you did this with Okta or OneLogin, you can do those same kind of things. However, the integration breaks down a bit around the other services. That's why we talk about this a lot. But you really want one consistent view. So if anytime I access Dropbox or another service or any kind of server, even if it was SAML. So you'll see right now, there's a lot of people in the marketplace that say, hey, we explicitly integrate with Azure Active Directory. There are some that don't, but but they do support SAML. So if they support SAML, which is that industry standard, that boom, right there, you can do everything you need with Azure Active Directory and that provider. Sometimes it just requires a little bit more work. Okay, so as I go through this, there's a lot of what needs to happen from a zero trust security standpoint. When we started to put together our own security as a service, we actually put this together because we worked with a number of customers. They actually helped us innovate in this area to provide a service that really starts to meet the needs of what they need. And most of the time, it's because either they have no security expertise, sometimes they have a great IT staff, but they just realize, yes, my IT staff is smart, they could figure it out, but they just can't do it all the time, or it's just not where their passion lies, and that's another kind of key thing. So getting this, so what we found was customers would either buy the license, some places we would help deploy it, but then when we come back 6 months, we'd ask like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, nothing. Nothing has happened for us. We've implemented one thing, that's what you guys did, and we haven't, we keep checking every once in a while. Microsoft has put newer features out, but we're just not keeping up. So we said, well, maybe that's something we should do together, and that's how we came up with this solution. And really, what we've started to address is there is not, every customer there's a lot of commonality, but there's a lot of things that are just very different. People work in different ways. Some customers have no, if you can believe it, no central office at all, completely remote. So really for them, they want a very cloud way. Other customers, everybody works in an office, but most times there's a mixture. A lot of remote people, salespeople, marketing people. They have a lot of contractors, subcontractors. They work with partners, distributors. They have to make them work with one another. So it's a very kind of complex and moving environment. Back in the old days, you could just set up a firewall, set up some networking, and boom, be done. Now it is, well, now I have new devices that are going different areas, and then not even taking into account IoT, sensors and readers and all those sorts of things that also need to plug into this one way or another. So basically, our security as a service is intended to really try to be a channel or a partner there for you, because you do have lots of different security needs. A lot of what we do, we try to align it with some of the Microsoft pieces for it, just to make it really easy in terms of both deployment management. It's a core part of our skill set, but Microsoft doesn't offer everything that we need. There's still customers who have plenty of servers, both on-prem in the cloud, and so we also do things like vulnerability assessments on a at the very least, like a monthly basis. Sometimes it's a year, annually, but once a quarter is what you really should go to. But that's not enough. Even when the security services are there, whether we're helping you with your mobile device management, this is our framework, but you could easily cut and paste this and make this your framework, right? So Azure Protect. So I talked a little bit about security. So again, that's the enforcement, the policies. Hey, well, Conrad, we have a new department that's coming up. We acquired somebody, and their people need something different. Well, that's why you call us, and we define the policies. The one thing that we always try to capture, something you really should think about as well, is when a user or a department comes to you and says, hey, I would like a policy that does this. Really the question that needs to be asked, and the answer that we need to get, is what is your intent, right? So what is your intent in terms of what it is you're trying to protect, where you're trying to go, the types of services that you're trying to provide? Because sometimes features in security get merged. Sometimes what you're asking for in the intent, that one thing you're asking for doesn't solve that whole problem. So if your intent is to provide, salespeople the ability to access Salesforce online anytime they're in the US, but not on weekends, like, okay, that's a clear intent. How I implement that might be in different ways, because it might mean something in mobile device management. It's definitely something in conditional access. I might want MFA when it is off hours, so I may want more control or more things I may ask, but I want to capture that intent, because if the features change or do merge, I don't need to go back to the user to figure out what security things they want to turn on. I know their intent. I just may need to reconfigure or redeploy or make it better, because sometimes we weren't able to fully enable that intent because it can fully do it. So it had some limitations, but now with the updates, I can fully offer that what's needed for the intent. Okay, so that's really around security. Azure Protect is really around backup. So what's important for you is you still need to back things up. Man, things are going to go wrong. As well as we secure them, something's going to get hacked into. Something is going to get, there's one thing where you just always need good backups. I mean, you absolutely should. But the other is, not just because the data went bad, just didn't die, the server's still there. Just got, there might be some kind of SQL injection attack that happened. Something, for some reason, somebody has ransomware on their particular computer. Well, I really just need to wipe it, but that ransomware was sitting there for a few days. So I need a backup that's a little bit further. I have to go fetch my data, which also means I need a restore policy and know how to restore that in that particular way. So, all this goes into good IT hygiene, right? So if you look at this whole thing, so as you'll cover, neglect that a bit, is really around your monitoring, patching, maintenance. So if you're staying up to date with your patching, staying up to date with antivirus, staying up to date with your security policies, you're doing good backups. You're doing good on your security deployment. You're doing as much as you can. Hygiene. When I think about good hygiene, I always think about the dentist, right? Good dental hygiene. Floss, mouthwash, I brush my teeth. I do this because I don't want to get my teeth drilled into. That's what I tell my kids. And they bought into it. And, so knock on wood, they're doing great because they don't want a cavity. That's why we do all the good hygiene. But as much as you do, sometimes dental stuff happens. And so when it does, we have to resolve it. But you got to do as much as you can to protect yourself. The last thing I'll talk about is Agile IT Azure framework. So it's something that we've been putting together where defining what it is to have a good cloud infrastructure, not just so much the servers, but the way you deploy it, the security permissions you need to have on it, the policies you need to enforce on it, just on that component alone, and automating it as well. So it's a big thing that we're working on. If you're interested, let us know. We'll talk further. So, but again, this right here could be yours. Even more so if you buy from us, but even if you don't, you should have all of these things, and they're all equal in size. And when you see things in the news, I'll tell you, it's most likely because they did not do one of these things 95% of the time. The other 5%, somebody just got a talented hacker and you can't stop it. People want to break in your house, put walls in the door, they'll come with a blowtorch. They know a way to get in. But if I didn't lock my doors and the windows are always open, I can't be mad when they stole my nice TV. So this is the thing, right? Do the good things and it'll happen. I know that went off a little bit of a tangent there, but this is all part of zero trust security. Your good hygiene, which you really have to have, your policies in the middle that you need to have, enables you to make sure that you can live in an environment. Remember what I said? Take the firewall out. This is what you need to go do. So when you take a look at what my roadmap is, what is it that I need to go do? Starting today. So starting today, stage 0. I could have started with 1, but 0 sounds good because you may not do anything else. You might say this zero trust thing isn't for me. I like what I'm doing. I hear some of the principles, sounds cool. I'll do some EMS. That's fine. But you should still know all these things. You should still take inventory. What do I have? I should still think about my process if I were to go do it, and then make that determination at the end of it. So if you don't buy into zero trust today, you shouldn't. What you should do is you should buy in at the fact that I need to have a secure environment and I do need to take inventory. If you don't have this today, you really absolutely should. The next thing after that, you start to go into the other more interesting stages, right? I do need to go start to deploy some of these kind of key elements. Again, I'm not going to do everything all the time. I'm not going to swap out and do the radius and swap out all my Wi-Fi devices, but I could put it as part of a plan, but I should protect what I can. So if I started with the Microsoft 365, I already have Azure Active Directory. I may or may not already have EMS. Get started today. You can do it with the global admins. So those are your IT administrators. If it's us, we'll tell you we turn MFA on for everything and we put on policies because that's the way we like to kind of get to a good posture. But you also want to go towards leadership people. You definitely want to protect them. One of the reasons is because they're the ones that normally get emails or attacked. They're the ones that normally have either access to send an email to say go do something. Sometimes they have access to certain files that are very important, HR files, particular accounting files. Your other staff may or may have it as well. If you think that they're important, we'll put them on the list. Nobody says that it only has to be this, but really think about those key people that you really want to start protecting, earlier than later, because they don't want egg on their face knowing that they could have been protected and they didn't. And then from there, really the mobile workforce is really the next one to go after because they, at the very least, they are not protected from the systems that you have in-house today. Not to say that, I just say, well, shouldn't it be the same? It should be the same, but you got to start someplace. So, your admins, your execs, or other kind of key people, especially in finance, your mobile workforce, and then really looking at everybody else within the organization. So that's kind of really nice progression. Even those services are there. Even though once I turn these things on, I could just roll it out to everybody. Not a good place to start. If you made a mistake or you need to update, you don't want to take down the whole business. It's not going to take it down, but you don't want to affect the whole business, and then it looks like we're more harmful than we are good. So, use this kind of nice soft rollout. It's the same rollout we do most of the times when we do a mail migration or something else. It's what most IT people live by, is this progression. Security is no different. And then last, but certainly not least, if I say it again, right, security is multiple layers. There is no one feature of security. There is no one thing. I'm not going to turn on DLP, data loss prevention, in Office 365 and take care of everything. I'm not going to turn Azure Active Directory with conditional access and cover everything. But we have to start someplace and create a roadmap. So what we want to do with you, it's what you should definitely do for yourself. If we don't do it together, or you just want guidance from us, that's what we're here for. So with that, I thank everybody for your time. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what Zero Trust is, and an idea of the kind of key things that you may want to get with Microsoft 365. I'll tell you, this session could be a whole day long as we talk about each kind of functional area. The next one, I think we'll do a topic that's a little on the more techie side from the infrastructure, talking about the NPS and Radius and Wi-Fi, which is really, really low level. I don't like to start out with that or put that in this session, because it's so low level that unless you understand the whole view of top of what you need to go do to really enforce this, or kind of the idea and mindset you need to have, all those things are pointless. So again, thank you for your time. Hopefully, you contact us so we can help you out and give you guidance, and hopefully enjoy this. With that, I'll take a look and see if we have any questions. Here, I think I see one already. Let's see. Hold on. Expand this. So one of the question here is, what are your thoughts on non-Microsoft approaches to Zero Trust? For example, Google, Beyond Core, do we plan to provide those services outside of Microsoft? It is something that we're looking at. One of the things is we didn't want to take on, we know Microsoft stuff really well. I mean, we're unashamed in saying it. It's a lot of what we do. I worked there for over 7 years, and we kind of hitched ourselves to that wagon, but we know that they're not going to provide all the answers. So normally what we look for are the gaps outside of that. We don't have a lot of customers that we deal with that that we've been asked to secure their Linux side of it. It has come up once in a while, but not in kind of a big swell. I think if you look at anybody else's approach to what they're doing for Zero Trust, they're following a lot of the same principles. The mechanics of how they deliver it are different, right? Because they're going to use, Google's going to use what they do for single sign-on. They're going to have their own devices, but they're following the same pattern in practice. The thing that I would say the most is, and I'd love to get feedback if you have more where we can maybe advance our principles. We're going to start talking about it more, but it's, if you follow that it just helps you define what you're going to do, because you may not do, you might be using Mimecast for something. I need to protect even my mail archives. So the pattern in practice is what's the most important. And that's really what it is. Everybody else who says, oh, there's Zero Trust and you can buy it, they're buying you, they're selling you a huge consulting deal. They're going to want to get lots of different third-party products, because they're going to say, let's get the best of all of them. But then they don't work well together, which means you got to pay even more money for you to make them all work together. It's just not something that we've really, bought into. So that's why we're kind of sticking to a lot of things that Microsoft's giving us, and the things that they don't, that's where we fill the gaps there. So hopefully that answers that question. Another one, how do you classify or label data? Can you use their label and have visibility on the labels? Yes, so you can define labels at the corporate level. So inside of EMS, you can go in from information protection, define what the classification is and the labels, have rules and policies on it. When you create an email inside of Outlook, or you have a Word document, you can have, there'll be something that shows up if it's been configured to show up, that allows the user to just pre-label them if they want. So if they go, hey, you know what, I want to label this as, HR confidential, and I'm putting new information in there that possibly has never been classified or a policy for, but I still want that policy enforcement to happen, so I can label or classify it right within the document. So, and users can see it too. So if I type something in there and I didn't, let's say, classify it, and I'm copying information in there, the system can detect it. So once I save it or put it someplace that the system sees it, then it'll say, oh, hey, I see, it meets this thing. It has these restrictions or policies, and here's who you can contact for information. So they can see that automatically. So a lot of these things aren't hidden. I think that's a great thing, because you don't want to put a policy and that's preventing them, like, what's happening here? So they get to see those particular policies that's there. So the how-to, that's a good question. I'll ask Sean to stick that on a future Tech Talk for us to maybe go show people how to do that one by ones, in case you're kind of interested. All right, another one here. Do you feel that the approach, 4 layers you laid out, sufficient and applicable to BYOD fully remote environment? I think, so well, let me go back to this real quick. Hopefully this answers your question, but for people that are all remote, if you're going to deploy them out, so if we look at the stages, I think, the stages just really kind of a roadmap of go small to a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Again, you can go at everybody and roll it out that way. Really, the important thing is this. So if you have remote users, you have no offices at all, and you kind of take this mantra on, you're probably in an even better scenario, I think, than people who have a lot of different offices, because you don't have that warm and fuzzy of a firewall, which normally a lot of people have and tend to I think, lean on way too much. So if you have a lot of remote offices, and for BYOD, so we, at Agile IT, we actually buy all the devices for our people after they've been here for a few months. We buy them a phone, put them on our plan, but we still MDM that thing. Right. And there's really 2 flavors. There's MAM, Mobile Application Manager, and MDM, which is Mobile Device Manager. In concert with one another, they're great. Even individually. So if you do Mobile Application Management, where it's my phone, I pay for it, has my data on it, my kids' pictures, and I have other applications. I store my things on it. But I also have certain applications that understand the security. So I use Outlook. And so if I use the built-in Android or iPhone application to do mail, and it works great with Office 365, but we put a conditional access, or we put a rule that says, if I'm not coming from a MAM supported application, then I can't get the data. So now I can't do that. I go to it, says, oh, your company prevents it. So I can use the company approved one, which is the Microsoft Outlook version of the client. Double click on it, log in, goes through a challenge, I log in, it gives me a little alert that says, hey, your organization manages this particular device. I'm going to restart the app. App goes, like, open back up, I'm already logged on, hits me with an MFA, now I have all my things. So in that environment, with MAM, and so that's BYOD, I get all my Outlook things, I get information on there, and it's great. So if let's say I were to leave the business, they can lock that part out. My phone is still mine. My data is still my data, but now I can't log on to Outlook, and all my data that was there goes away, because it's put in a little sandbox. And even if I'm in Outlook and I have an attachment and I say, oh, let me save it to my phone so I could do something else, it blocks me. If I copy text out of it and I go, oh, let me copy this text, put it in Evernote, it says when I paste it, it pastes out the same string. Your organization has a policy that doesn't allow you to do this. It's a different set of words, but essentially that's what it does. So in that scenario, when I have Outlook, I open up a Word document or a PDF viewer that is allowed to do that. And Microsoft has done a lot of great work to add more and more applications in there, including a browser. I can still get the functionality I need from my phone, but the organization still gets to have policies encroached in there, including if that information was rights protected with information protected. So that's even without information protection put on. That's just Office 365 with EMS for mobile device, or it's in the EMS purchasing, which is a part of Microsoft 365, but really the low level thing that's doing it is Intune with mobile application management. So that all works together, right? In this whole scenario, it's Azure Active Directory, Office 365, which is facilitating, but it's not doing anything really interesting in this scenario, and it's Intune mobile application management. So in BYOD, it still works out really, really well. If you purchase that device, you have a little more control to say, hey, I'm going to put MDM on that so I can really control it. Now I can do full remote wipe. MAM's not going to give me full remote wipe. but it gives me access to the services, but not anything else. So hopefully that answers that particular question. So again, we'll send this out to people. We'll get this recorded, put it out as well. I appreciate the questions. They're great. Some of these we have to follow up on. You know, again, if you take this and that other little colorful slide that I have and make it your own, I think that's great. If most of us live in this way, it's good. So hopefully the other thing I wanted to do is make zero trust zero trust security as a pattern and practice not so daunting. Like, oh, that's too much heavy lifting for me to get to. I'm never going to get there. I've seen this in the IT industry for years. Oh, this thing that say the perfect world IT thing. This sounds like only something Boeing or Coca-Cola is going to afford to do and spend millions of dollars and huge budget. It's not. This fits kind of your size, whatever your size is, but you have to buy into the principles, but you have to do something. And at least hopefully we talked today is that there's some things you could do to get closer to this. So why not go that way? Again, contact us so we can help you out and learn more, and you know, we'd love to partner together and do more with you in the future. So again, thank you so much for taking your time. We're right at our time today. If you have any other questions, please send it over. My email is conrad.a@agilit.com. Pleasure to speak with everybody, and have a great day.